This is Traditional Logic, Chapter 11. Now, in this section of the book, in these last few chapters, we are discussing deductive inference, or reasoning, which is expressed in syllogisms. Now, to return to a metaphor that I've already used in class, it's helpful to think of reasoning, or syllogisms, like a machine. You put in what you already know, and then the machine puts out new knowledge. Now, to extend this metaphor a little bit, a syllogism is said to be valid when the conclusion logically follows from the premises. So, validity is like the machine working properly. And up until now, in our study of logic, we've talked about terms and statements, and we've looked at the form of syllogisms, but we haven't really addressed how the process works. And so finally, we're getting to answer the question, how do we know when a syllogism is valid? Or in other words, how do we know when the machinery is working? Well, in this chapter and the next two, we are going to cover the 7 rules of validity. Now, all of these rules must be followed for a syllogism to be valid. So it's as if our machine has 7 parts, and they all must be working in order for the process of reasoning to go correctly. In this chapter, we'll cover the first 2 rules, and these 2 rules are grouped together and called terminological rules. And that's just a fancy way of saying these 2 rules have to do with the terms of the argument. And in particular, these 2 rules revolve around the middle term of the argument. So let's do a quick review of the form of a syllogism to make sure that we're on the same page. And I'll use our classic example of a syllogism. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Our last 2 terms are Socrates and mortal. They are the S and P terms. Notice the P term is in the first premise and the S term is in the second premise. And the term that binds together the 2 premises is called the middle term, abbreviated M. It's really important to remember as we talk about our rules that the middle term is what connects the major term and the minor term. The middle term is like the glue that binds together the 2 terms of the conclusion. It's kind of behind the scenes in that we don't see it in the final product, but it is a thing that connects them. Now, here's the first rule of validity. There must be 3 and only 3 terms. No more, no less. Now, there are 2 ways in which this rule is commonly broken, and we call them fallacies or flaws in reasoning. The first way this rule is commonly broken is called the fallacy of 4 terms. It's quite straightforward. It's when a syllogism, even though it has 3 propositions, actually has 4 terms. Consider this example. All men are mortal. Socrates is a Greek. Therefore, all Greeks are mortal. Now, you may notice that the conclusion, all Greeks are mortal, is true. However, it's not valid in that it doesn't follow from the premises. Notice we have 4 terms here: men, mortal, Socrates, and Greek. And so what this means is that we have no true middle term. If Greek and mortal are our S and P terms in the conclusion, we might say we have 2 middle terms, men and Socrates. And so there's no one thing to bind together Greeks and mortals. And so the machine breaks down and the syllogism is invalid. Now, the second way Rule 1 breaks down is called the fallacy of equivocation. If you remember back to when we talked about terms, we said that equivocal terms are words which are spelled and pronounced exactly the same, but can have 2 totally different meanings. Consider this example. Some playing cards are jokers. Socrates is a joker. Therefore, Socrates is a playing card. Now here the conclusion is downright ridiculous. Of course, Socrates is not a playing card. But you could say that both of the premises are true. Some playing cards are jokers. Well, yes, if the definition of joker that we're using is the playing card that goes before queen and king. You could also say it's true that Socrates was a joker, if our definition of joker is a person who makes jokes a lot. So what happens here is that even though we have a single term, joker, we're actually using it in 2 different ways. So it's as if we actually have two middle terms, which, as we just saw, breaks the machine. Now, the second rule of validity is the middle term must not occur in the conclusion. Now, this rule is also quite straightforward. Notice it also revolves around the middle term. If you have the middle term in a conclusion, that means one of two things has gone wrong. Either the middle term has replaced the S or P, the major or minor term, in which case it can't bind the two together, or you have three terms in your conclusion, and your proposition is not in a legal form. Consider this example. Socrates is a man. All men are mortal. Therefore, some mortals are men. Now, what's happened here? Men, or man, is our middle term because it appears in both the first and second premise, but it's also creeped into the conclusion. Some mortals are men. And while that's true, it breaks the machine because it doesn't follow from the premises. So, to summarize, there are 7 rules that govern validity. The first 2 have to do with the terms of arguments. Rule 1 is there must be 3 and only 3 terms. This can be broken with the fallacy of 4 terms or the fallacy of equivocation, where the middle term is equivocal and has 2 different meanings. Rule 2 is the middle term must not occur in the conclusion. Have a great day.